Do you ever wonder why in movies and in television that those who are technically savvy are depicted as these socially inept, difficult people? Sadly, because too many times it's been true. So many times when end users call a help desk, they're already frustrated, they're already upset, they want that person to solve their problem, and right or wrong, that sometimes becomes a bad experience. One of the things that you need to do as a technician is to know how to deal with people when they're not at their best. Being able to figure out, calmly guide through a process, and bring about resolution. I can guarantee you it will save you heartburn. My middle son actually worked on a help desk for a long time and actually did a fabulous job, not because he was the most technically savvy, but because he was able to deal with people well. I guarantee you it will definitely save you a lot of difficulty in the long run. So as you enter into the world of computing and computer support, buckle up because it will definitely be a wild ride.
One of the first things you need to do is have a professional image. It may seem like it's not necessary in some aspects, but believe me, it can actually create a number of problems negatively, or it can actually enhance things for you depending on how you handle it. Now, to begin with, I want to acquaint you with a principle called perception is reality. At one point in time, I was actually working for a large telecommunications company, and there were two of us basically doing the same job, and we would split up different accounts in the branch. One of the things that became painfully obvious is that my coworker many times was nowhere to be seen or heard, and so many times they just assumed that he was goofing off or not doing his job. Now, over time, that became a serious problem, and it ended up costing him later. So even if he had been working hard, the perception was that he was goofing off. So it's important that you understand that how you are perceived is ending up to being reality in people's minds. Let me give you an example. This suave, debonair guy on the left, this is how many IT professionals see themselves. Smooth, skilled, kind of cool, and certainly giving that great type of image and instantly creating confidence. Unfortunately, this is how what you could call quote-unquote normal people, or basically people not in IT, and how they see IT professionals. Many times, it's not a positive image. There are all sorts of different things that go on as far as in sitcoms and in the media that people in IT are pictured as having very low social skills simply because so many times over the years it's proven to be true. So it's important to understand how to be able to change the image of IT personnel and technicians into a more positive way. Now understand that people are wired different ways. We have different strengths, we have different weaknesses, different combinations that make us effective for who we are. So it's important to understand where you sort of fit in what I like to call the skills continuum. This actually comes from having dealt with a variety of different types of IT-related people over the years. So here we have a scale. On one end, to the left, you have high social skills, and on the other end, you have high technical skills. And essentially, this is a continuum where people generally tend to fall somewhere within these ranges. First, let's look at how someone with high social skills might work in the IT world. So you have this picture of this attractive woman. Now, this type of person generally is going to be great with people. They're able to make small talk, they make eye contact, they easily can make conversation, but the problem is they can be technically not very deep. So that's one of the things that may be great with people, but not so great from a technical standpoint. That could be problematic in certain settings. Next, let's take a look at the other end of the skills continuum, where frankly, most IT people typically will find themselves. So here you have someone, kind of looks like they really are great with IT. So they're very, very intelligent and skilled. This is someone that knows their stuff, that can get in and solve problems, and probably can write code and solve problems in their sleep. But technically, while they're very, very good, with people, not so good. So what about someone that's kind of in between? They've got good social skills, but they've got good technical skills as well. It's not an either or, but a both and. So you have someone here that clearly, by the formulas that are on the board, is technically skilled, but also is good with people. And in support environments, it's these two skills together that are essential for success, and take the image of the nerdy woman with glasses and the very suave business-looking woman to be closer to reality. The key is balance. It's not do you have great social skills and do you have great technical skills, but you have to have some degree of both in order to be able to work effectively in a support environment. Now, ultimately, the key is a professional image. This means appropriate work attire. You need to dress for success. One of the things that I think is interesting is that when I first started in the industry, it seemed like the standard uniform for all the IT support people was simply a white t-shirt and a pair of jeans. And it was never announced as a uniform, but that just seemed to be the way all of them dressed. But neat and appropriate clothing are going to be important. You may have a dress code at the company you work for. Please make sure you observe it. Make sure the clothing is clean and neat. No stains, no smells, no tears, no wrinkles. And ultimately, remember, stay away from jewelry simply because there can actually be safety issues. Another thing that's important to professional image is courteous behavior. People are not always going to be nice and friendly and understanding. Sometimes they can be hot-headed and upset. But as a professional, one of the things about having that professional image is being able to control your tongue and making sure you can be courteous even if the other person clearly is not being very courteous at all. Next is punctuality. If you tell a customer that you're going to be somewhere at a certain time, you need to make every effort to be there. If for some reason you're delayed, you need to let them know right away what the holdup may be and when they can expect you. Punctuality is important in terms of employment as well. You'd be surprised the number of times that those who remain in jobs are kept there because of their respect for time. And ultimately, think of punctuality as respect for someone else's time. Responsiveness is important as well. I know in a number of jobs I've worked, responsiveness was important. Do you answer the phone in the spot where you may work? Are you answering after hours if you're on call? If someone's trying to get a hold of you or email you or something else, you're responding in some sort of a timely manner. Now, different problems are going to require different amounts of attention. If you're working on something, you may simply be able to send an email or a note saying, I'm sorry I can't work on your problem right now in the middle of X, Y, and Z. But letting people know that you're actually acknowledging the fact that they're trying to contact you can be particularly important. And then consistent follow-up. Once you have a task that's been assigned to you, make sure you follow up on it. It's always a good idea that even after you've resolved an issue, you can always just maybe contact the user and ask them if the problem is continuing or if it's definitely solved. But the important part is not letting things fall through the cracks, but making sure you keep up with the tasks that are there. And then keeping commitments. If you say you'll have something done by a certain time, do it. One of the things that's easy to do is to feel pressure from people to promise something you can't deliver. Never, never, never do that. Always make sure that what you commit to, you can deliver. I have created numerous problems for myself by saying I'll have it done by, and it was an unrealistic time simply because I wanted to make them feel better, and then you end up creating a bigger problem as a result. So make sure you keep your commitments. In principle, communication is remarkably simple. It's the process of taking an idea or a concept in your own mind, translating it into words, and having the person that's hearing those words then reconstruct that idea at least somewhat close to what you intended to begin with. But it's amazing how often the process of communication doesn't quite go the way we'd like. So it's important for you as a professional, whether you consider yourself very seasoned or polished with communication, or it needs improvement, is to always be able to take these principles into mind. The first thing that's important to understand is knowing how confusion happens. Again, there are a variety of different factors that can affect things. First, confusion can happen with miscommunication. It may be using a word that can mean something to a different person. It can mean that perhaps something that's said is vague or completely misunderstood or out of context. But miscommunication can create great amounts of confusion. Everyone has expectations. The problem is sometimes we don't know what those expectations are. When you don't meet expectations from someone else, particularly a customer or a coworker or even your boss, then there can be tension immediately. Unmet expectations creates confusion and can complicate relationships. So it's important to know what the expectations are so that you can either say, I can't meet those expectations because they're not realistic, or here's how I can meet them in an effective manner. And another thing that can happen in terms of how confusion can be introduced has to do with cultural differences. We live in a world where we come in contact with vastly different cultures. Some may be somewhat familiar. For instance, if you're in North America and you're in the United States and you deal with people from Canada, there's a lot of similarities. But you can deal with people in Europe, and while some of the language might be the same, cultures and customs and so many other things can be different. And it's important to realize that those cultural differences can have a big impact. The world is becoming increasingly globalized, where we deal with people that have very different backgrounds. So realize that that can introduce confusion into the mix. One of the important things to understand with communication is learning how to listen. And there's a variety of different ways to do this. One is using a practice called active listening. Active listening means that, first of all, you may repeat back what you've heard. So as this person is speaking with you, when they're done, you may say, so what I'm understanding you say is, and then repeat back principle by principle by principle. Now, obviously, you need to keep the conversation in these sort of summarized chunks so as to eliminate potential confusion. But repeat back what you heard or what you thought you heard. And either that person will say, yes, that's exactly right, or no, that's completely wrong, or you got most of it right, and here's an aspect of, something you might need to clarify. So it's important, if you repeat back what you heard, to be able to get feedback from that person to make sure that what you think you heard is what you actually heard. Another important principle is don't interrupt. Never interrupt someone when they're speaking. It's generally considered impolite, and you may actually miss something very important. It's also important that as you're listening, you're not thinking of what you want to say next. Concentrate on what they are saying. Not only what they're saying, but how they're saying it, their tone, their body language, and things like that. But never, ever, ever interrupt. And then ask questions. If something's not clear, ask about it. If there's an aspect that you may think, for instance, isn't realistic and it's an expectation you can't meet, you could say, well, that's not going to be possible. Is it possible to do this? Or how does that sound? Is that correct? Always make sure that you don't have distractions that are going on. If your cell phone is potentially going to interrupt a conversation, put it on vibrate. You can also put your phone, for instance, on Do Not Disturb if you're carrying on a conversation. It's important to be able to give that type of person the attention that they deserve. Another thing that's important is for you to strive for clarity, because it really is amazing how often things can get lost in translation. So the first thing I want to introduce you to is called DUA. Don't use acronyms. Okay, I'll be honest, I made that one up, but it actually gives you the point. So many times in different industries, particularly IT, there are so many acronyms, and people don't always understand what they mean. In fact, they may have no clue. Say, well, that's an ATA. Well, what's an ATA? You may know it as Advanced Attachment Interface. They don't know what that means. It's better just to say, well, there's a certain way your disk drive attaches to your computer for you to be able to access information. That sounds way better than using an acronym. But just stay away from it. All it does is generally tend to confuse people. Another thing is to use proper language. Some people have a better command of the English language than others, and actually it's even beyond that. English is one of many languages in the world. So whatever language you're speaking, try to use the best language that you can. Use correct grammar, use correct clarity, use a correct tone of voice, avoid slang, and so forth. Another thing is avoid technical terms, not just acronyms, but things that people aren't going to understand. Try to explain it in the plainest way possible. Not in a condescending or insulting way, but just a way that someone who has no idea how these things work will be able to understand. And then always be clear. Don't be vague. Don't be imprecise. Try to be very, very clear when you communicate. The clearer you are, the better it will be. And imagine if the word that gets around about you is, yeah, well, he actually talks to me like I'm a person, like I'm not beneath them or not initiated into the great IT club. They're actually able to explain this problem in plain speech to me. Those are the kind of things you want to have said about you. One of the greatest ways you can distinguish yourself as a technician is to have excellent customer service skills. And customers come in all shapes and sizes, all temperaments, all backgrounds, all types. But when you know how to truly give the best customer service experience, it gives them the feeling that they're important. I'm sure that you as an individual have dealt with organizations where the customer service has been awful. I remember one time, this has been years ago, I was waiting in a McDonald's line with my family, and we were trying to get the McDonald's breakfast. Now, the time of day they were going to stop serving was, I believe it was 10:30. And we'd been in line, the staff knew we were in line, and when we got up there, they said, we don't have anything left. And when we started to say, well, wait a minute, we've been here all this time, we were expecting to be served. And the person answered, this was a manager, said, well, I didn't ask you to wait in that line. Well, needless to say, that did not make the right impression. Another way to have handled it would have been, I'm very, very sorry. I know this isn't working out the way you wanted. We kind of had to get things started over for our noon meal. Here, let me, pay for your breakfast, or we'll make you what you want, even though the menu's already closed. That would have been a better way to be able to deal with it instead of being insulting or condescending. So let's talk about customer service. So always make excellent service your goal. Show courtesy and respect. It's amazing what happens if you just are respectful and courteous to people. Your technical skill may not even be as high as someone else's, but if you're courteous, respectful, and pleasant, it makes a much more positive impact. People could call and say, I want so-and-so because I know they'll treat me respectfully. Always under-promise and over-deliver. And what that means is don't promise that you can do something that's beyond extraordinary and not be able to do it. Instead, say, this is what I'm sure I can do, and this is the time in which I can do it in. And then work to strive to do better than what you've told them. So be realistic, but then work what you can to do something even better. And what that does is it gives a great impression that you care and that you value both their problem and the solution for them. Always give updates and follow-up. I have dealt with my share of technical problems over the years, and it's amazing what happens if you just let people know periodically what the problem is. Otherwise, you can sort of feel like you're being hounded constantly instead of just saying, okay, I'm giving you, this is a 30-minute update. We're still working on X, Y, and Z. May not have much to report, but here's where things are. I think we'll have X, Y, and Z done. So give updates and always follow up. Even after the problem's resolved, follow-up is always a good thing. Even if the update isn't good news, just knowing something rather than nothing's a good idea. Remember that if people have to fill in the blanks, so to speak, they will inevitably always do it with the worst information possible. Now, I want to just take, as we get toward the end of this, to understand the aspect of dealing with difficult people. Over the years, I have dealt with some of the most difficult people on the planet, and it sometimes felt like this fellow's sitting in front of a shark. It's very important to know how to deal with people like this. So there's you, and there's the customer. Should be pretty obvious from this graphic. So realize the customer may be angry. Your job is to stay calm, no matter how angry they get. Remember, they may be frustrated. They may have had to talk to 5 people before they got to you, or other people may have failed to address the problem, or no one may have addressed the problem at all. So make sure you actually stay calm. Realize that they may be frustrated. Sometimes the help desk, for example, is called the no help desk. And it's not intended to be hurtful, but that can be the impression that people get. Remember I said about perception versus reality? And you need to be patient. Listen. And again, don't interrupt. And try to think of ways that you can be helpful. And remember that sometimes if they're particularly upset, they may be extremely rude. And you need to be polite. Remember, nothing good happens when you pour gasoline on an open flame. So the only thing that happens if you're angry, frustrated, and rude to someone who's angry, frustrated, and rude, it's only going to get worse. So instead of being gasoline, be fire, where you end up trying to smooth over or extinguish the flames. So do what you can to empathize. Put yourself in their place. If you were them dealing with this problem and it hadn't been resolved at all, or the ticket got lost, or whatever they're dealing with, try to put yourself in their shoes and empathize. Next, you may need to apologize. Well, yes, I'm sorry that technician B didn't get to work on this. You don't have to say, I don't think he's particularly good, or he's getting ready to be fired, or anything like that. Just say, I'm really sorry that you're having to deal with this. I will do everything I can, but we're really sorry that, it's gotten to this state. And then finally, prioritize. Let them know that you are going to do everything you can to deal with their problem. And even in the midst of dealing with very, very upset and angry people, it can really make a huge difference when you take this type of an approach. But one final word on this is don't get eaten. Here's what I mean by that. Many times you'll deal with people that are upset and angry. But at no time do you have to deal with people who are abusive, who may belittle you, put you down, be angry inappropriately. There is nothing in a job description that says you have to be treated badly. So that's basically in the terms of the motif that we're looking at here. Don't get eaten. It may be necessary to walk away or escalate to a supervisor, but don't let people treat you in an inhuman way. So some terms as we summarize this. Perception. Remember, this is how other people see you rather than how you see yourself. A mirror tells you how you can see yourself, but it doesn't show you how other people perceive you. You'll sometimes hear the word soft skills. And this is also called people skills as opposed to technical skills. It's one thing to know the kind of RAM to put in the computer and what the resolution on a monitor is or how a network functions. Those are technical skills. It's another being able to interact with other people. People are ultimately more complicated. So these people skills or soft skills are something you may need to develop, but they're still very important when you're in any kind of technical role. Active listening is the practice of paying close attention to what the other person is saying rather than thinking about what you want to say next. And then, of course, DUA, don't use acronyms, which is really just a humorous acronym reminding technical people to avoid using technical language and acronyms when dealing with customers.
All of these principles we just looked at in this lesson are what are called image management. Your image, how people perceive you. Because keep in mind that perception is reality. How people perceive you is how they think you really are. And what you can do by following the principles we talked about is you can help shape what that image actually is. One of the things that you can do, for instance, in the middle of a difficult situation, you can have a calm, competent, kind image in the middle of chaos. And that by itself can be worth a lot. Maintaining a professional decorum, image, and the way you're handling yourself will go a long way toward you being an engineer and technician of excellence.